guys. Sorry about that. A little bit of technical issues.
The storm and Carrie is maybe.
I think might be the storm. We're having terrible storms here. So hang on there. Is everybody still with us?
It looks like it.
Okay, great.
So I was quickly doing an introduction. Catherine, if you want to pop the PowerPoint back up. Anyway, I'm Caitlin Worsham, and I was saying that I work out of Vietnam, Korea, China, and the United States. So it looks like we're back in business, and I've been doing this over 10 years. So if anybody has any questions that are related to or not related to this after the presentation, you can always chat me after.
And I'm Catherine Leary. I've been both in admission at 2 different schools, and I've been doing college admission for about 5 years now. I also was a teacher at prep schools for 15 years. Let me bring up the slides, I hope. Sorry about the technical issues.
Well,
go ahead, Caitlin, while I'm doing that.
I have a poll at the beginning of this to see how many of you are seniors. A lot of you are probably deep in either the essay terror right now or possibly the essay writing, depending on where you are. Some of you may just be juniors. And what we're really trying to start with today is a discussion of what are the requisites, right? So depending on your school list, there might only be 1 requisite essay. Typically, there are going to be 3 requisite essays, and that's going to start off with Catherine, we're still not seeing the PowerPoint. A main essay, and then a why major or why essay, which tends to be the most obvious supplemental essay. And then you're going to have the tricky additional information section essay. And a lot of people leave that blank or do silly things with it, like add a bunch of awards and honors that don't maybe mean anything to an admissions official. So what we're trying to do is basically walk you through what the requisites are and what not to do and to do in college essays.
By any chance, can you see the screen now, the presentation?
No, not yet.
Okay. Sorry about that.
So what I can do is just get us started as Catherine pulls up the slide. So again, in the 3 basic essays, we're really starting with the main essay, what to write and what not to write about. And
is that it? Can you see it now?
Yes, we can. Thanks, Catherine.
Great. Okay.
So if you could just move us to the overview. Great.
Here's the overview. Okay, again.
All right.
We intend to talk about the 3 basic essays that everybody should write. We're going to talk about your main essay and how to write that, what to and what not to write about in your essay. Should you submit, there's always an option for, is there anything else you'd like us to know about you essay? Sometimes it's optional, sometimes it isn't. And then the dreaded why school essay. Let's talk about your main essay. Caitlin, why don't you take it from here?
So I'm interested in how many people have basically written their main essay at this stage and are looking for criticism, because one of the ideas that we're thinking about doing in the future is to do a live critique. So we're pretty excited to do a live critique. So there are basically 7 essay prompts, as I'm sure you all know, through the Common App. There are, of course, ones going on through the Coalition app as well. Okay, you write yours. So 1 sentence done, that's funny. Depending on where you are in your essay, right? You might have an idea, you might not have an idea. But basically what we find is to forget the prompts, right? If the prompts help you, awesome. If the prompts don't help you, forget them. I find that 1 prompt in particular leads to very bad essays. Does anyone in the chat box want to guess what that prompt is? For $500.
Nobody has a guess?
The why school essay is always hard. No, it's the failure essay, because the failure essay always comes across as super negative, guys. That's not to say that I haven't seen successful essays written by the failure prompt in the past, but typically it can be pretty negative. Of course, some people have undergone obstacles and challenges that maybe make that a slightly easier essay, but that seems to be the one that tends to be the most difficult to pull off. So if you're trying to speak to a topic, maybe avoid that. But what I find is the best for the main essay is to write whatever you want, honestly, whatever you think is going to speak about you. So 550 to 650 words. When I work with students, I tell students to write me 5,000 words. I say, write as much as you want, and let's cherry pick from the content. I find it's much easier to cut than to create new content. So I would say do some free writes, dig deep, right? Make it really personal. Catherine has use appropriate humor in there. Being funny is hard, guys. Is anyone really good at being funny in writing? Because if you are, teach us your wicked ways.
I've read some pretty funny essays.
But I don't think that that's most people's default. So if you can be funny, these admissions officers have to read so many of these per day. So if you can be funny and make them laugh, that's a really, really good entry point. But I find that's really hard. So what most students tend to go with is description, right? Really, really descriptive essays, because everybody's going to write about essentially a handful of topics, and it's the detail and the description that elevate a normal topic into your topic, right? Your story, who you are. And one of the ways that I find that students can do this is so oftentimes students will come into my room and they will say, Caitlin, I don't have anything special about me. And I'm like, well, that can't possibly be true. And so one of the things to generate ideas, if you don't already have an idea, is to steal ideas from your friends and your family. So one of my favorite college essays ever was written because a student told me a story about her father raising a pig in a bathroom when she was, or before she was even born. And I said, that is the craziest story that I've ever heard. And she said, but how could I make it a college essay? And we sat together and we talked about it. And she ended up writing one of the most beautiful college essays I've ever read by basically stealing this little story from her dad. So mine your friends and family for stories. Catherine says, look at old photos and videos. Sometimes you forget things that have happened. So as far as main essay prompts go, I think that the biggest issue is generating the content, right? Generating the idea. And those are just some ideas to get you started. But of course, if you can't get started and you're stuck, one option is to work with someone like me and Catherine. And then if you're not stuck and you have an essay, one of the things that I would do is share it with select readers. Some people make the mistake of handing their essay out to multiple readers. And sometimes you can just get what I would call too much feedback.
Yes, and to that point, I was using a platform for a very short time where I would have multiple readers read kids' essays that I was working with, who I was working with just for feedback. And we thought we were pretty much done with one essay and we got a write it over response. So I think the one thing that is really important to remember about your essays is they're subjective. Sometimes Caitlin loves an essay and I hate it. Sometimes I love an essay and Caitlin hates it. Most of the time we both love it, but remember that you don't know who's on the other side of your essay. So if you ask 5 people, you're going to get 5 different responses. The other thing I would add to what Caitlin had to say was, don't be afraid to dig deep. I mean, that sounds really trite, but it's okay, and it's probably preferable to write something that's deeply personal about yourself. One boy, for example, that I'm working with lost his dad when he was 18 months, but he feels a special connection to his father because he looks just like him. He has the same sense of humor. He loves to do the same things. It's a deeply personal essay for him, but one that I think we could all probably relate to on a little bit of a level. The other thing you want to remember is to write about something that you don't avoid politics. It's not something I put in here, but you don't know who's on the other side of your essay, who the reader is. You don't know what their values are and their political perspective. So you want to avoid any topic that is going to negatively impact your essay.
Yes. And then, of course, Catherine and I are going to disagree again about politics in a little bit once we get into that. It's going to happen, right? So we're showing the subjectivity even in this moment. But
Well, you know what I'm saying.
Of course.
I'm going to go to the next slide.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we were starting, it's a good segue about what to write and what not to write about. I cannot tell you, at this point in my life, I have read hundreds of thousands of essays as both an admission director of admission and as a college counselor and a boarding school counselor. And I cannot tell you how many stories I have read about summer camp. What I would write about is a deeply personal story about something a lot of people don't know about you. And the way you get those kinds of stories is, like we said, mining your friends, your family. Sometimes your family has old videos that are very fun to look at. You could find a little story in an old video or some old family photos. Caitlin, you want to talk about what not to write about besides summer camps?
So I would just say be careful, because obviously when you present yourself, you don't want to basically present yourself as a liability to an institution, which is really unfortunate, right? That you can't always be honest. I think that there are places in the application where if you've gone through a really hard time, those absolutely need to be in there, particularly if you've had a slump in your grades or some sort of disciplinary infraction involving something or other, but typically going really negative. So this goes back to the failure essay. Not that any of these things are failures, but that presenting yourself in the negative parts of you maybe too openly can sometimes work against you, right? So you want to think about this as a positive, positive thing, right? So overly focusing on grades or SATs make you seem a little bit too numbers driven. And then as far as, again, emotional disorders and stuff, that is a really important part of where many people are in the world, but it can be very dangerous to your application, to be very cautious about pursuing those topics. The mission trip epiphany. So one of the things that I love about, I know I'm not going in the order that Catherine wrote things, but
That's okay.
One of the things that I really love about college essays is I always tell students, like, be really worried about the sports essay, for example, or be really worried about the charitable works essay, because sometimes those just are really, really hard to write, right? Because the takeaway is, and I won the match and I learned a valuable lesson, or I didn't win the match, but I still won a valuable lesson, or I worked with my team and it was great. And so it's really hard to do profound takeaways from sports essays. And it's really hard to do profound essays that don't seem condescending sometimes with some volunteer work. So those are tricky topics, right? I say that students need to be cautious writing about them. And I would say typically students shouldn't write about them unless they're strong writers. But of course, some of my favorite essays are, one of my favorite essays is a swimming essay. One of my favorite essays is a soccer essay about a young man with his dad who flew halfway across the world to watch a soccer game. And it didn't have anything to do with soccer, really. It had to do with the relationship between him and his father and all of the things that came along with that. So there are many, many ways to get around the sort of don't do topics. But these are sort of general rules if you're still finding the content of what you're trying to say.
And along with grades, I would add, don't really try to avoid writing about all that time that you were struggling with math and your father told you to just stick with it, and so you did, and you studied 100 hours and then you got an A on the test. That's actually an essay I've seen a lot, and one that's boring and repetitive. And if you try to avoid writing about things that are already showing up on your application in your activities list. They can reflect your activities list and your resume, certainly, but you don't want to write about information that you've already given them in other parts of your application. Would you agree with that, Caitlin?
Yeah, and of course, we should have mentioned this before. We're speaking specifically to American applications in this presentation, not to European systems or to Canadian systems. Those are obviously going to be very different essays, or maybe not obviously going to be very different essays, but they are going to be very different essays. But the way that you would address those is going to be actually very similar to how you would address the why major essay, which we're going to get to in just a minute.
Yeah. Okay, this is the more about you essay. So if you look in the writing section on the Common App and the Coalition app, there's a little place underneath the main essay that says, is there anything else you would like us to know about you, or that you would like to tell us about yourself? A lot of kids don't take advantage of that essay, but Caitlin and I are strong believers that even if it's an optional essay, send it to them anyway. If you can send them more information about yourself that's positive, why wouldn't you do that? Especially if it's going to give you an edge over the kids who just don't bother to submit it. If you look like you're really interested because you go the extra mile of writing the more about you essay, that's going to tell the school that you're really interested in them. So submit it, even if it's optional. You don't want to repeat information that's in your main essay, but you want to write something a little bit more about you that they might want to know. For example, I'll go back to the boy who's writing about his father who died when he was 18 months old. His more about him essay is that his mother and his mom remarried to a man who had a lot of children, and now he lives in a blended family of 7 kids. So that's a little more adding to his main essay about his dad. Okay. So you want to write about topics that you might want to think about is write about a time when you changed your mind about something, which is actually a really interesting essay, I think. What about you? What's different about you and your family? You can write an essay about your special interests that would, tell somebody how intellectually curious you are. Here's one that Caitlin hates: overcoming hardships, and by that I mean non-academic. And Caitlin, do you want to speak about that for a minute?
I guess the problem with all of the essay topics for me in the Common App and all of the additional information concepts is that everything can easily go into cliche. And so my area of specialization is as a writing coach. I was coached in the Brown Writing Fellows program years and years ago, and then basically spent the rest of my life trying to teach writing in various universities and various places. And so I have a lot of problems with very young people trying to write the overcoming hardships essay, mostly because luckily many people have not yet undergone them. Obviously, if you have undergone a hardship, then you should absolutely write about it. But I'm hoping that the majority of you out there are more struggling to find that topic that's going to set you apart in the application pool. And I think that is much harder than having a story that automatically just sort of speaks to who you are and that you get to tell.
Yes. And then how you see the world, what you believe. And then I add again, like I said earlier, don't repeat information that you've already discussed in your main essay. You can allude to it, but don't repeat any information that you've already. This is something different that you want to tell people about yourself.
So usually the additional information section, guys, your main essay is really like the deep dive into you as a more conceptual person, maybe your family, maybe just some very, very deep story to you. Typically the additional information section essay is going to be some unusual circumstance that has brought you here, some extremely deep interest that goes beyond what the scope of the why school essay is allowing for. So how many of you, just out of curiosity, pop in the chat box, how many of you know like your school list? Do people have 100% finalized school lists? Does anybody have a 100% finalized school list? Pop in the chat box.
I would be surprised.
I wouldn't.
No?
No.
Are there any kids out there with finalized school lists?
So Brandon, will you tell us how many schools are on your list? Will you share that little bit of information with us? Not I-5able, okay. Okay. So typically a student with say 13 schools, right? Say with 10 schools, say with 12, whatever. What I say is that you can get away with the bones of 5 essays, okay? Of course, that depends on the supplements that you have. So Stanford is kind of brutal with the number of supplements that they have, for example.
And so with Wake Forest.
Right. And then some schools, even, I don't know if probably no one's heard of Linfield College, which is one of my favorite little colleges in Portland. I adore it. But they have some really tricky supplements, man. So sometimes you have to do some one-offs. A lot of the great women's colleges have very specific prompts, like Barnard College. I don't know if anyone out there is applying to Barnard. Again, one of my favorites. I do speak in superlatives a lot, so I can't be trusted. I have lots of favorites. But they have really niche essays. So UChicago prides themselves on having some of the most niche essays, and I would say that typically a lot of the bones of one of your sort of 5 can fit that brief, right? So think about having a battery of 5 if you're applying to a broad spectrum of schools that have a lot of supplements. But typically these 3 are gonna do, yeah, that's right. Do what you need, right? If you can get the content to 5, that's sort of the goal. So the additional information section is sort of like the bit of information that you want to go to every college that didn't fit in the main essay. That's what I tell students who are super dynamic, who have maybe done some crazy personal project or undergone some amazing adventure. And we actually are doing the personal project / portfolio on Thursday, for those of you who are interested. Typically, my students who do a portfolio or a personal project, they're the more aggressive, higher tier applying students, and they submit the additional information section essay. So typically this essay for me is crafted around that. And it typically ties into one of these questions that Catherine has sort of submitted. So one of my favorite essays was about poetry translation and the project of poetry translation in the additional information section essay. Another one was of a student's engagement with political science in various capacities. Another student is writing about his experience tutoring an older woman in technology and how that's affecting his concept of education, which is really beautiful. So depending on sort of, it's not a repetition of the activity that's going to appear on the Common App, but it's a deep dive into something that's a much bigger subject that really drives you. So that's sort of the additional information section essay.
One thing I want to add is something I came across recently was that somebody was putting in awards in this section. The section is for an essay. It's not for you to list things like awards and achievements. That goes in your activities / resume section, and then there's also a little section for 5 extras if you want to add. But I just want to stress this is not that section. Okay, awards.
So Catherine's right. So most colleges that want the full resume are going to ask for a resume attachment. That's what they ask for.
Activities seem to be more popular right now, but yeah. And there was something else I was going to say that escapes. Oh, I know. I was not to put pressure on, but you know, you have to remember that a lot of the kids who are applying to the schools that you're applying to look like you on paper, meaning they have similar test scores, they have similar grades, they may or may not have similar activities. So this is a chance for you to really set yourself apart from all of those other kids who are applying to the school. The why school essay. This
is my favorite essay because finally, guys, finally, we have an essay that has a formula. And I don't like a super standard formula, but at least, you know, you don't
formulaic.
It's much more formulaic than the other essays where you're like, I don't know, just where do I start? So the why school essay should be very much driven by what you want to, possibly what you want to major in if you're going to a research institution. If you're going to a smaller liberal arts college, it should be about your interests, right? Because the idea of going to a liberal arts institution is that you get to explore, you get to figure out what you want. Maybe you don't know what you want yet, right? Whereas at a larger research-driven institution, they're going to expect you to have a little bit more focus. So the great thing about this essay is that depending on your school list and what kinds of schools that you're applying to, you can target your essay so that it's going to cross over for many schools, right? So the biggest problem that people run into with this essay is that they don't do their research. So I'm assuming a lot of people have a dream school out there. Does anybody have a dream school? Anybody want to share the dream school? Maybe it was UChicago, maybe it was Stanford, or maybe we hate those schools for their MIT, tough. Okay, so MIT, oh man, MIT is brutal, right? Because they've got their 5 separate essays, right? They're tough. Tufts is a little bit easier, right? Tufts, so let's just go with Tufts, right? So if you're going to apply to Tufts, you kind of want to know which school of Tufts you're applying to, right? Same with Georgetown, right? If you're applying for the School of Foreign Service, you're going to have a very different approach than Tufts. If UCLA is your dream school, you don't even necessarily have to write this essay. Go, Ashley. But for most schools are going to require this, right? So if Georgetown is your jam and you want to go to the School of Foreign Service, you need to know the School of Foreign Service, right? And you shouldn't just know this for the essay. You should know this for yourself because you shouldn't have a dream school without knowing why it's your dream school. And you should also know this for the interview, right? So, for example, when I applied to Brown, it actually was a terrible fit for me in the end, but I knew I wanted to go to Brown. I knew who I wanted to study with. I wanted to study with a woman named Meredith Steinbach, whose work I had read and who was extremely inspirational to me. I wanted to go and be a part of the Writing Fellows, mostly because I had worked jobs that I didn't like throughout the early part of college when I transferred in, and I wanted a job that was going to pay me well, that was doing what I'm really passionate about, which is the teaching of writing, which I had done actually prior to going to Brown. I wrote about the library. They have a really cool library with some really cool first edition collections. So I wrote specifically about the books within the first edition collection that I was really interested in pursuing. And so that level of detail, right, obviously is going to change student to student, year on year, program to program. But ultimately, it's that level of detail. It's knowing exactly why the university is a good fit for you that's going to make you stand apart. And they do not want a book report on them. They want each detail, right? So if I mentioned, for example, the comic book collection, I should say graphic novel collection at the Brown Library, I would talk about maybe how my graphic novel collection developed and why it's so important to me as part of why I want to go to Brown, right? So the point is the connectivity of your bio, right, or whatever's happened to you, to what really drives you about this university. So that's a really, really important component, is to make sure each little bullet point isn't just a book report about them because they know them. It's connecting them to you.
Yes, and I would add to that a really good place, a really good resource to get information about why school is if you have the resources to visit that particular school and what you notice when you're there, professors you talk to, people who are deans, that sort of thing. You can get a lot of good information on the school visit. I actually have kids take a little notebook when they go to a school visit and take notes on it and then refer back to it afterwards. Please just don't say you've always wanted to go to MIT or whatever school it is. And Caitlin and I have actually seen that essay more than once. Just assume that everybody that's applying to that school has always wanted to go to that school. So you have to give them a specific reason about why you always wanted to go to that school.
Right. Don't look ill-informed, guys, right? Never look ill-informed.
All over the website, all over it.
Okay, so we're going to get to these questions on the right in just a minute. Okay. Oh,
can I go back?
Go back. Wait, back it up. Where are we? Okay. So one of the things, so if you don't know the school very well and you don't have the resources to do a visitation, typically, we mentioned this in our last presentation, you can ask to be connected to a student. You could also maybe reach out through your high school to find students who are at that school now, and maybe get connected directly through your high school alumni database, right, to mine them for information about what they've enjoyed about the campus. Find out what the traditions are. Find out, you can also Google alumni who graduated and find out what they've gone on to do and how they might serve as inspirations for the programs you want to come from. But again, the richer the detail, the better. So a lot of students will be like, can I just mention classes? And I say classes are a little bit different than professors. Mentioning professors is fine because the professors tend to do ongoing research in a subject. But if you mention classes, sometimes classes rotate, classes get cut, and it shows maybe not as much engagement with an understanding of the university and what's driving the university. So sometimes people will mention internships. I'm like, okay, you want to do an internship. Everybody wants to do an internship. What do you want to have an internship in, right? What specifically have students done to intern? Same with clubs, right? Same with any activity that you mentioned. So again, this is a really nuanced level of detail and then connecting those details to you. So that takes.
Also I would check the school's mission site. Because, for example, I went to Boston College for graduate school. I'm Jesuit educated, and those schools would be Boston College, Holy Cross, Fordham, Georgetown. You get the flavor. They're all very much about social justice. So in the Why School essay, you might want to mention something that you've done to demonstrate that mission without specifically saying what it is. So another place to mine for that information is the mission statement of each school, and they all have different ones.
So we've got a couple of questions in the corner. One is tips on the UChicago second essay, which is going to spill us over into, I think we're doing a supplemental essay at some stage. But there's, of course, the Why Chicago, and then there's the very complex UChicago prompts. Do we have many people is anyone else applying to UChicago out there before I spend time on this?
Me.
Okay. So the UChicago prompts are notoriously niche, right? But what I find is that if students write 5 essays that speak to things that they want to speak to, typically one of those essays is actually going to respond in part to the UChicago prompt. And what you then end up doing is figuring out the way to tweak your frame so that you're speaking about a story that you want to answer the UChicago prompt. So this is what good interviewers do, right? You get asked a bum interview question, right? Or you get asked an interview question that you have no idea how to answer, right? It's a hot dog sandwich. I'm trying to understand what's going on.
Infinite breadsticks?
Oh my God, I just completely lost the thread about if basically what you can do is you can take the frame, right? So no matter what the UChicago frame is.
Yeah, they said they're both UChicago prompts.
Right. And if you have maybe a clever person to bounce ideas off of, typically, right, in an interview or a difficult essay question like this, you can figure out a way to embed a story that speaks about you using one of the many Chicago frames. All right, so
that's is even better than the Wake Forest My Top 10.
There are a lot of weird ones out there. So I mean, the supplements, guys, we could do such a deep dive into supplements. Barnard has the One Woman Hit from History supplement that I mentioned earlier. Linfield has the your fictional roommate would be, which I think is really hard. USC, is anyone applying to USC? They have like all of those micro questions that are really, really important. Chapman, which is a less competitive university than USC, but it has a lot of really niche questions that can be really complicated to answer. So I'm just going to the UChicago essay prompts from this year. So you're talking about the Olive Garden one. Hold on, I just want to pop. It's not fair for us to not share with everybody. So let me just pop this in the chat box so everyone can know what we're talking about. Okay. This is one of the harder ones, right? If there's a limited amount of matter in the universe, how can Olive Garden, along with other restaurants, offer truly unlimited soup, salad, and breadsticks? So again, this would be one of my physics or theology bound students who have already written an essay about the universe, right? So I would say like that would be the essay that you would have already had in your queue that you wanted to write, that maybe you were going to put for the what you want to major in and why essay, or maybe you wanted to put in the additional information section that for UChicago you would co-opt and use for that. I wouldn't probably pick that UChicago essay, to be fair, Peter, because that one's really hard. I would do, let's see, which one would I do from this year? Like something like this, right? This is a much more catch-all concept. So you picked the harder one. But sometimes picking the harder prompt can really set you apart from other applicants. So the way that we started this was trying to remind you that, of course, they're reading thousands of essays a day. And Catherine said, that she and I disagree sometimes on how good an essay is. I sent an essay out to 2 of my colleagues earlier this morning, and we had a disagreement about how good it was. So it's very subjective. And it's not just subjective like who it's being sent to, it's what time of day, when in the work week.
We used to say in the admission office, we used to say, did you have Wheaties or, whatever kind of cereal for breakfast that morning? I want to go to a couple of other questions we have. Could you please share the links? These are always going to be on the Fiveable website. You can go back and review everything that we've said anytime you want on the Fiveable.me website. One person said, I've heard that you should make your why school essay emphasize why you want to go to that school and how you would be a contributor to the college community. Is that true? Yes. That is true.
So again, connecting the little bullet points about you, right? So if you've been very involved in certain activities that you want to bring, or you feel like your diversity, so Catherine wanted to include a diversity essay in here, but I think that's more of a supplemental essay and maybe not a requisite essay. So we had a disagreement about what is a requisite and what is a supplemental essay. But I think that typically students can get away with 3 essays in their queue. So one has got to be the why major and why school.
The diversity essay shows up as a must on some schools' applications, and it's a tough one to answer if you are, like me, the white kid from Boston. Okay, so it can be tough. What you want to talk about in that case is what set you apart in your own school. And, there are several ways that you can do that. We're, like we said, on Thursday, we're doing another workshop on special projects. We'd love to know what else you'd like to hear about in terms of the college application process. What other subjects would you like, aside from financial aid, which is coming up, I see on the Fiveable website really soon, and merit scholarships, what other subjects would you like to hear about as far as college applications go?
So we've just been asked tips on the special skills and talents essay. Some people do have them, right? So a lot of Division I athletes, right, have trouble writing those essays. I would definitely brainstorm those if you're a strong suit is athletics. Do you have a special skill or talent that you're thinking about? Maybe not. So a lot of people do, and that's what next session is about. Yeah, that's right. So some people do, but most people, going for something random can be kind of funny, but if it doesn't connect,
it can really fall flat.
Really fall flat, right? So, so really think deeply about that, right? So one of my students wrote about organizational capacity, which I thought was kind of unique, and he wrote a lot about
no, not like doing a rubric.
No. No. Reflects enough about you. One of my students wrote about his relationship with time, and he connected it with the language that he spoke and the culture that he was from, and why his relationship with time was different than other people's relationships with time, because he's speaking a certain language at home, but okay.
We'll tell them no.
He's speaking a certain language at home, but he's also doing going to an international school where he's speaking English, and the relationships that with time are different in both spaces. So he basically wrote about his relationship with Post-it notes, which is random, right? How could that be a special talent or skill? But it ended up being this like extremely deep reflection about that and about his organizational capacity. It was really, really good. So that's what I think that the person meant when they meant random. So if you can figure out how to embed something that's special in a weird idea that's still the same story that people are typically telling, then that's one way to do it.
Here's a great question. What's the best way to group your extracurriculars on the activities section? And I think what you're asking, Skylar, if I understand correctly, is you're asking which activities to put first. And to that, I would answer, and Caitlin, please feel free to jump in, but what I usually have kids do is list the most important things to them. Work, if you have a job, I would definitely put that front and center, because believe it or not, a lot of kids don't have jobs. It means you are responsible, that you show up on time, and that you have to answer to somebody. So I think jobs are a great thing to highlight in your extracurricular activities. And then, of course, the activities that are most important to you should go front and center. Any athletic activities or any particular clubs that you're a leader in. I wouldn't put those random kind of school-driven service projects, because those all kind of look the same. So you want to pick the most important things that really reflect who you are as a person and what you're going to bring to that school community.
Yeah, so that ties back to the school community idea. I would just say, if you're thinking about bullet points, Skylar, think the most recent, most important, longest running, right, greatest contributions to people, and that usually will involve leadership. So those are sort of the top four, if that's an easier way to sort of break it down. And then, of course, you want to try to condense things that fit certain brackets. So like, say you've been a part of like 6 different MUN clubs, but you have a ton of activities, and you're trying to push stuff in. I would try to show breadth of MUN through one explanation. If you've got like 20 activities that you're trying to showcase in the Common App, it depends on what your resume looks like. It would be very student specific.
And guys and ladies, this is really important. Don't use broad terms like participated in when you're describing your activities. Caitlin and I are laughing because we see it all the time. Say exactly what you did. and describe what you did, okay? So team leader, organized events for such and such, you know, you have a limited, I think it's a very limited word count, so make every word count and be very descriptive in what you did so that they have a feeling for, you know, that you could, Xeroxing, if you were Xeroxing things, you know, you want to make sure that they see the leadership skills that you were doing in the extracurriculars that you were participating in.
So we've moved a little bit away from the why essay, and I just want to tie this up really quickly. So is anyone—
There's a good question on here too. Can you see it, the 3 languages?
I can. Is anyone, so this kind of maybe speaks to this question about the Georgetown has popped in our box. Is anyone applying to a school that has a smaller supplement like BU that only has like a 250 word supplement? Like one small supplement, because you can create multiple versions of the Common App, and sometimes students write these beautiful what they want to major in essays that start off with these deeply embedded stories about, say, how they got interested in engineering, right? And that typically doesn't tend to be a groundbreaking essay, but sometimes it is. So I had a student who ended up engineering a device for the blind, because of charity work that she had done over time, and it was a really cool essay, and it took a very long time because it started with the moment of her epiphany when she realized she wanted to do this. And so it ended up being about like 500 words that she had written about this beautiful story about how she got involved in this crazy engineering project that led her on to amazing things. So that ended up being the kind of essay that goes in the additional information section essay. And then what I'm talking about with the YBU is how that additional information really deeply connects to the Y school essay, right, which would be the YBU essay. So that's sort of I would say the bifurcation on those 2 essays. So if you end up with this beautiful essay and you're like, but my supplement's only 200 words or 150 words, that's one way that you can split that essay into and try to get the content that you're trying to convey about yourself to the reader. So those are sort of what I think of when I think of the 3 requisite essays. Again, there are going to be 1,000 other supplemental questions that we can get into. But I would say again, to wrap up, one of the questions was the writing about 3 languages.
No.
So people are writing about the same things, okay? It's not about, are you going to have a new topic? Probably not, right? Everything is derivative at this stage. But what matters is your detail, right? So what I start with when I work with students is really, really descriptive writing. Sometimes I make them do really, really annoying exercises like name a gender of a person, an age, a space, and an object. And I just get them to write a paragraph about that to try to really work on the 5 senses and the description of language, and thinking about how you can use just descriptive language, no feelings, to convey an idea about a person. And then I try to get them to embed that in their own writing about themselves. So it's those details that are going to elevate your piece from the general to the specific. And that takes us all the way back to the main essay, right? Which is how you sort of elevate that to the next level. It's the same way that you elevate the Y school with the really school specific details. So this is a fairly general topic because we don't have essays to workshop. So one of our ideas moving forward was to workshop your essays. So if people are interested in having essays workshopped in a public platform, I know it's very scary, we're open to doing a webinar on that, and we would love to have your submissions. So you have access to our emails in the next slide, and of course anyone who's interested in that can just private message us through those emails, send us essays, or however you like, and we can try to get Fiveable to help us workshop your essay in a public forum.
I just want to address the last question about the 3 languages. I'm not sure we specifically addressed it for you. That's going to show up someplace on your application. I wouldn't address that if you're specifically applying to that school at Georgetown. I would not write about speaking 3 languages. It will show up someplace else.
See, I'm going to disagree again.
Okay.
It depends on what you're saying about the languages, right? So one of the things that I think really is important about having lived in Vietnam for a long time and speaking Vietnamese to a degree is understanding that when someone asks me in Vietnamese my age, that they are not being rude, right? That you cannot address someone in Vietnamese without understanding their age and their gender. And that's a very interesting cultural perspective.
Yeah,
language. So I think
I agree with that. Yes.
I think what Catherine is saying, don't just like talk about like, I learned this and I learned this, and that's what she's talking about. But there are ways to approach the complex nature of your relationship to language and how you've learned them and why.
I totally agree with that.
Might elevate that essay. So I would say again, this is sometimes why it's good to have a writing coach, because it's hard to talk about writing in a vacuum, which is why I'm excited for some group critiques online so that you can actually see what that looks like.
So I hope we were helpful. Please join us again on Thursday evening at 8 o'clock when we talk about special projects. In the meantime, please feel free to email us with any questions that you have. And if you want to go back to the slides, just go to the Fiveable website. Everything will be right on there. Thank you very much for participating.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Good night.
Hope to see you again.
Bye.